Are meetups dying? If they are, do they deserve to die? Or is something coming to replace them? I'm Ross, and this is Half Physical, Half Digital. So, why do I even care about meetups? I've been going to meetups and have been a meetup organizer on and off since about 2009. I've made many friends and learned many skills at meetups. Even my current job was a result of networking at a tech event. So I'm a big believer in the existence of meetups and the value that they can have. Why were meetups great prior to 2020? Let me count the reasons. There were many. Good community. There were great ways to network. It was a good way to find out information about who's hiring. It was even a good start to start your public speaking. It was kind of the first step to the big leagues of becoming a tech conference speaker. There was free food, which was always nice. And it was an excellent source of information if you were looking to learn about new technologies or even where the industry was heading in general. It was also honestly a good place to find smart, motivated people that were dedicated to learning and bettering themselves, and finding people that were dedicated to getting better was often a good thing. It was even a good place to find a mentor. People that were looking to make a community a better place were often also looking to help individual people in their journey, being it from small amounts of experience just trying to get into the industry to looking to take the next step, find a next job, learn the next skill, or do something that was important to them. So why have meetups been decimated? Literally 90% of the meetup groups don't exist anymore. I mean, the long and the short of it is lockdown and lockdown-related craziness. So prior to 2020 and the lockdown, most people were working in the office. Most people were looking for a thing to do on the way home before they kind of settled in for the night. But lockdown changed kind of all of that. People, largely and very quickly moved to a remote first working style where a lot of people were already at home at the end of the workday and also looking for different hobbies. There was several years in which the meetups weren't existing and people found different hobbies to do, whether it was music, art, sports, painting, time with family, significant others, having kids, whatever. Now that we're kind of on the other side of that pandemic, it really isn't the same world anymore. And so those same solutions really, even the people that were there, aren't the same people anymore. Another thing that happened, Meetup.com was acquired by WeWork, and all of a sudden Meetup went from being a very inexpensive place to hold meetups to being an expensive place just to exist to get RSVPs and communicate about events. Prior to 2020, that was, a thing, but it was I would say a bitter pill worth swallowing because you were still getting a lot of RSVPs in attendance at your events. After lockdown, most of your people weren't attending at all, or attending virtual events, and it wasn't really quite the same, and you were still paying the same price. And that was a very difficult pill to swallow. Also, let's not forget YouTube. It exists. AI, GPT. There are other ways to get tech information that exist in larger quantities than they did 5 years ago. It's not like it was impossible to find information on the internet in 2019, but the amount of information does seem to have increased, and therefore the digestibility of some of it has as well. So that's certainly something that makes, just coming to a meetup Not necessarily as exciting of an option as it was before. That's kind of the old way, right? The old way is pizza and presentations. You come, you RSVP, somebody shows up, they give a 30 to 50 minute presentation on a technical subject. You eat a couple slices of pizza. You network for a little while. Maybe you head to a place for a pint afterwards, and then you go back to your life, right? That was the old way of doing things. And I think in 2024, 2025 in the future, I don't think that's going to work anymore. So, what are other reasons why the old way doesn't work? Workplaces are more distributed. Not everybody's in the office anymore. Some people are in the office sometimes. Some people are fully remote. Some people are hybrid remote. That kind of standard going to the office and then doing stuff on the way back home isn't really a paradigm that is common or at least universal anymore. So meetup organizers can't build around that, hey, stop by on your way back from the office type paradigm. Also, for HR, companies aren't necessarily looking for local hires anymore. We're since our workplaces are largely hybrid, our hiring is largely, hybrid as well. People aren't necessarily looking for somebody to fit into the office. They're just looking for somebody to fit on the team. Therefore, finding the next smart person at a meetup isn't as important as finding the best candidate for a job, which isn't necessarily bad, but it means that your next hire isn't going to necessarily come from a meetup. It might come from Ohio or New Hampshire or London or any place that has enough internet connection to meet your job. And therefore, putting money into just a meetup for your community maybe doesn't make sense to your HR or marketing anymore. Buildings themselves, they were locked down. They were out of the loop for a long time, and they haven't hosted these events for a while, and so sometimes the people that were the points of contact for those events have moved on, been fired, just haven't needed to use those resources in a while. And so those places that used to be reliable, free/cheap places to meet up maybe don't exist anymore, or the ways to contact the person to find out how to meet up is different, and that what was an open door is now closed. There hasn't been that 4 or 5 years of meetups to welcome new attendees bit by bit and find new meetup leaders. There's been no way to easily pass the torch from people who had existing information on how to find pizza, how to find sponsors, how to find space, and help bring the next group of leaders along so that these groups can become self-sustaining. The available pool of attendees might be smaller, and definitely the old mailing lists don't have as much value as they used to. The average job change in tech is 3 to 5 years, and we're 3 to 5 years later. So somebody who indicated that they would be interested in meeting up 5 years ago might not even be working in the same job or even in the same city anymore. And so therefore sending out an email blast to that person to come for a slice of pizza and to learn about this subject might just not matter to them anymore. It's not all bad news, but I think there does need to be some changes in order for us to figure out a way to move forward. So we've heard doom and gloom, and we've heard bad news. How might meetups come back, right? Is there a way to move forward? So one of the ways to do it is we need to focus on making it easy for the organizer. People are out of practice. People are lonely. They're still looking for community. But the job of the organizers has gotten more difficult. And so I think we should focus on ways to make it easier to bring people together. There should be a focus on community, a focus on action, a focus on accountability. When we're getting together, we're not necessarily, as excited to talk about the latest and greatest framework. Maybe we're more excited about just talking about being accountable, finding out what we want to do with our lives, or just feel a little bit less alone in being on this tech journey. The next question is, is anyone helping? is there anyone who's making this easier instead of all of these steps that seem to make it harder? And there does seem to be one. It's a place called Guild. It's found at guild.host. It's free. The sponsors actually come from the platform. So instead of trying to look for a sponsor individually, you can just, make a guild on guild, host an event, and some of that help will just come directly from them, which is pretty sweet. And it does seem like there's a more community-based effort instead of seeing the organizer as a juicy, ripe source of revenue. They see it as something that's creating value, which is pretty cool. I actually reached out to the folks at Guild to see if they had anything to say about this, and Taz, one of the people who is building Guild, actually responded. So I got to talk to him, and I would like to show a little bit of what we talked about here. Feel free to enjoy.
Let's start with maybe you introducing yourself, and then I can maybe go into why I reached out to you and kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So quick introduction. I'm Taz, the founder of Guild. And so, as you know, of course, we're a community platform. So we host events, presentations, networks, and in the future, we have discussions on the way as well. So long story short, I've been a community organizer for about 15 years. Started Toronto JS way back in 2010 or so. Scaled that to about 18,000 combined members today. And through that process, learned of all the challenges it takes to run a community, which led me to then go on and found Guild. Beyond that, I'm a 3-time startup founder. Guild's my 3rd startup, a technical management consultant for a bunch of big firms. So I've been around the block a few times.
Fair enough. So let's lead into why I reached out to you. So I have also been a meetup organizer on and off since about 2009. I've made some friends, earned some, learned some skills along the way. And I've very highly valued and appreciated what attending meetups and tech events has done for just my personal and career development. However, I've noticed that since, in the last 5 years, really since lockdown, attendance of events and the number of meetups in general in most metropolitan areas has been maybe reduced by about 90% from its peak figures in maybe 2019. Some of that is life stuff. Some of that is, the process of Meetup, one of the largest meetup kind of meeting like repositories, going kind of very strongly at its different communities to pay for themselves to exist. And so I wanted to reach out because I found you just on a tweet, and joined or created a guild, and it is now like 3 members strong. And I just wanted to see, like, looking at the site that you've created, it looks like some thought was put into this process, and I just wanted to see if I was crazy or if someone else had seen similar things and was trying to figure out a way for the guild experience or the meetup experience or whatever you want to call it, a way for it to come back and not necessarily return to its glory years, but to find the new normal and the new way forward. And so I figured, somebody who's been maybe thinking about this and put in a fair amount of effort into creating a place for that new thing to exist might have thought about this as well. And so that's why I reached out, and you gave some context over email and then said, hey, we can also talk about it in person. So here we are. So I guess the first question is, I'm not trying to make you pimp your product, but can you just talk about the experience of, in specifically tech meetups? A lot of them try to run cash zero from a volunteer base, just trying to get more than 0 people to arrive to talk about something. Meetup, at least the last time I checked, wants to charge me per meetup that I want to be in charge of something like between $30 and $50 a month for the privilege of just keeping the list and keeping the number of RSVPs. Like, where do you think the future is in that, and where might a solution like Guild fit in with that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll rewind a little bit. So yeah, so like essentially we both started groups on meetup.com way back 2009, 2010, like essentially back within that era. And meetup.com as a platform itself started, I think, in 2001. And so it's quite an old platform, it's quite an old code base, it's quite an old, thing. And for me, even starting something in 2010, it just felt dated, like these days it just continues to feel just dated. And being in software, for both of us, I'm sure we can we can both come up with a better platform. And so for in the back of my mind, for the longest time, that was my thought was, okay, I know I can technically build a better platform, but why would anyone use it? And for me, I didn't want to play a big game of spreadsheet where you're comparing, oh, okay, I can have, 10 events over here before I get to the premium plan or whatever. And I can only have 5 over here. And like, this has like online events and this one doesn't. And you know what I mean? I don't want to play a big game of spreadsheet. And then you're comparing the cost at the bottom. Like that's basically a losing battle in my mind. And that's also a battle of basically just taking a sliver of the market and not really making any sort of big difference essentially to the whole ecosystem. So it took me until, well, first of all, we sold a company to Ticketmaster Live Nation back in 2015, and that actually taught me a lot about the industry. And a funny thing coming out of that was Ticketmaster's net revenue on concerts. It's blended, but it works out to be anywhere between 4 and 8% is their total net revenue figure across concerts. Yet on sponsorship, they make about a 65% net margin. And that is because they're able to negotiate whatever they want on the event side, negotiate whatever they want with the sponsors, and kind of get those sponsors to build a competitive dynamic in order to sponsor those events. So coming out of that, I thought, hey, why don't we just do the same thing, but for communities? Where in Toronto JS, my biggest problem was finding sponsors. My biggest problem was getting funding. As you said, a lot of these are volunteer efforts. And so, you don't have folks paying you a bunch of money to come to these events. It's very much done on a free basis, meant to bolster the whole ecosystem around it. And so I always thought the Meetup model was kind of backwards, like why is someone like me that's creating value for a whole ecosystem paying money to create value? Like that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. In terms of basic capitalism or economics or whatever you want to call it, a value creator should be getting paid. A value creator should not be the one paying to create value. That seems just backwards. And so that's what we want to do with Guild fundamentally, was create a free platform, free to use, pay out value creators, pay out community organizers, and pay the folks that are enabling an ecosystem, while Guild as a centralized global corporation, whatever you want to call that, is able to effectively monetize sponsors and that ecosystem and build all the tools, yada, 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 essentially in a much more effective way to monetize that. So that's kind of what we did with Guild in a nutshell. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at today.
Fair enough. So one of the reasons that, or among the reasons that meetups were great prior to 2020, it was, networking, community, getting experience with public speaking in a lower pressure context. But one of the big things was it was one of the only reliable sources for tech learning pre-proliferation of YouTube and learning platforms. We are now in 2024 where there are where if I want to learn about JavaScript or C# backends or whatever, I can ask an AI, I can go to YouTube, I can go to about 5 different places today in the next 5 minutes, and I don't necessarily have to wait for someone to give a PowerPoint presentation. So some of the reasons for meetups aren't the same anymore. How has Guild tried to build that old way? Well, not how has or sorry, guild try to account for the fact that the future is kind of here and our access to information is different in the way of meeting up?
Yeah, well, to me, I'd argue that even back then, information was highly accessible. Like, like for me, I've always been a self-taught software developer myself. I started 2001. I built three-dimensional video game engines and yada yada yada. That I learned just by myself, and that was before any of the more recent developments, essentially, that you just mentioned. For me, it's always been about diversity of information. So about learning about things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Like, for example, essentially, I'm a React developer. So if I was to go online, I'd probably go deeper and deeper and deeper into React. But like hanging out with folks in terms of real world events, I'll find out more about new CSS techniques. I'll find out more about I think I found out about essentially liquid responsive design the other day, which I thought was super cool, and I would have never found that out if I had just gone deeper into React. And so in terms of diversity of information, I find out way more from just the community and learning from others. And then I can take that and then go deeper online and then go deeper on YouTube and et cetera, et cetera. So what I found was that my breadth of information is much greater at an event because I'm learning from everyone else and their experiences versus online where I just end up going deeper.
I agree with that. I think finding out the temperature of an industry is a lot easier when you meet up with a group of people and find out what the smartest, most motivated people are interested in, trying, experimenting, what they hate. And so like to what to save your time on if someone who you think is a little bit more motivated and smart than you is already struggling with or doesn't see the value of it can keep you from kind of some dead ends in
For what it's
the
worth,
new things.
exactly, that's
Yeah,
why I started Toronto JS. When I started Toronto JS was
yeah.
in 2010. It's when front end apps got really complicated. It's when you had things like Backbone coming out, and it was no longer just sprinkling on some jQuery. It was trying to like roll your own backbone, and nobody knew what they were doing whatsoever. And so I kind of needed a support group. I kind of needed a place where I can go grab a pint and just talk it over with a bunch of people going through the same thing. And so and that's why I started Toronto JS, was for that fundamental reason, and that hey, like we don't know what we're doing. Let's try to learn this. Let's try to get through this together and learn from each other. And for me, community events is very much the same thing today.
So speaking of having a pint, traditionally, let's go 5 to 10 years ago, remote work was a thing, but it was not as highly proliferated throughout the industry as it is right now. I'm a half in the office, half out of the office person. But when I was, going to meetups 3, 4, 5 times a week, I was, doing it on my way back from the office.
Yeah.
How does the current work arrangement of some people never leaving their house other than groceries and absolute necessities, some people being 100% back into the office, and some people kind of halfway? How does that influence the process of communicating? First of all, that people can meet up. Second, the value in meeting up and in giving people the motivation if they're already at home to leave their home and to participate.
So this is an interesting question, and I'll answer it directly, but then I'll answer it kind of indirectly to begin with. So, like obviously we're talking about Meetup.com as well as Guild. I had a good chat with one of the WeWork executives. So as you know, essentially I'm not sure if you know, but like Meetup was acquired by WeWork way back in 2017, and that kind of, in my opinion, started its decline. But anyway, I'll save that opinion for later. I asked the WeWork executive, why did you acquire Meetup? And like, what was your rationale for that? And what they told me was, well, first of all, a lot of the meetup events were hosted at WeWorks, and so it kind of made sense to kind of incorporate that within the WeWork family. But also, what they wanted to do with WeWork was capture, work. You know what I mean? The essence of going to work. They wanted to capture that. They saw Meetup and they saw communities as the bridge between work and life. As you said, you go to a Meetup event after work on your way back to life. You know what I mean? Like back to your home life, and so on and so forth. So it's really filling that gap in the middle, and I feel like it does that very well, as you said. So that's kind of a bit more indirect answer. However, a bit more directly in terms of how does it fit in with remote work, essentially for me right now, I'm remote. So I have a colleague in Toronto and I have a colleague in Berlin. So I rarely see them. However, the people that I'm more likely to see are the other people, essentially where I am right now in London, UK. I see them all the time. And so for me, kind of filling in that social void, or even that kind of knowledge share learning void, essentially that I have as someone that's fully remote, it's highly critical for me. And again, it serves as that kind of in between work-life balance for me, where I can go, I can learn more, apply that to work. I can also socialize, apply that to life, and it kind of provides that perfect in between. Is like for myself, who is 100% remote right now.
Yeah, I'm in Wisconsin, and half of my team is in Montreal. And so like I understand that even the days that I'm in the office, the office used to have 100 people in it every day. Now it's got maybe 20.
Yeah.
And that's fine because like people are working their thing, but the level of socialization is not the same at the office, so there is still that void. One thing I wanted to ask about, in running meetups on and off for the last, let's say, 15 years, like RSVPs versus people who show up has always been a thing. Like more people will indicate interest versus the people that actually show up, and that's always been a thing. But it seems like maybe the social contract between an RSVP and a people and people showing up seems to be less strong than it ever has been before. Is there a mechanic way to track that that we're trying to get better on? I know that I mean the big thing as an organizer is making sure that either too much or enough food gets purchased if people need to eat, is usually the largest thing because that's usually the thing that has a financial outlay. And I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on it, or design paradigms that you were thinking about putting into the process.
Yeah, so we did find that on meetup events, it was about 50% attendance. On guild events, it's anywhere from 60 to 70%. So it's slightly higher on guild events for some reason. I don't know if that'll just equalize over time or what, but it is slightly higher right now, which is kind of cool. In terms of food, this is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about because I'm like, for me, I'm actually vegetarian, so getting vegetarian food's a big deal. Folks that are celiac or gluten free, it's another big deal.
Yeah,
We
pizza
plan
in a
on
presentation was always the paradigm, and anyone who was eating veggies or couldn't have crust basically were often left in the lurch.
left
So
out.
it makes
Yeah,
100%
exactly.
sense.
Yeah, and so we actually want to add that right to a user profile. So just you could add your dietary preference right to a user profile, and then as an organizer, it'll just give you a report right before the event saying, hey, there are 2 gluten-free people and 10 vegetarians or whatever it is, and just so you can get like a proper pie chart and know how to order your pies. And so that's what we plan to do in the future. But in terms like essentially the root cause of this question is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, because like food ordering, as you said, is incredibly valid, of course. But another reason is also for sponsorship. People want to figure out how many people are coming to these events to appease their sponsors. And I have an opinion. This might be a hot take. I don't know. I don't know if it is or not. That you're like essentially they're measuring it wrong. It's not about quantity, it's about quality of attendees. And I found that historically, measuring the quality of an attendance is incredibly difficult. Obviously, measuring the quantity is easy. You just count the number of people, whatever, but measuring like who are the most likely recurring people, who are the most likely to try out new technologies, who are the most likely to come back and give talks about something, you know what I mean? All of those are big quality indicators that have been historically incredibly difficult to measure. Thankfully, because we have a platform and all of that, we want to make those types of metrics easier to measure and easier to kind of surface. And so that's something else we plan on doing in the future, is kind of providing more quality metrics, more qualitative metrics in addition to quantitative metrics.
Now, one thing I noticed specifically on the Guild platform, there's a couple different kind of tabs, and one of them is like there's an entire presentation section. So it seems like information sharing seems to be core to the process. But honestly, like the first time that I did this particular group of people that I'm trying to get going, attendance was low, and there was no item that we were trying to capture and reshare. For people that want to create and share content, can you talk just briefly about your your value add or the thing that you're trying to add to the equation there?
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. Presentations are first-class citizens. So we have guilds, events, and presentations. Those are our three first-class citizens right now. We will be launching discussions in the future as well. And so, yeah, presentations are there really to capture that type of content that's being performed at an event. As you said, it's there to share with others and so on and so forth, and kind of build that content hub so that folks that aren't able to attend the event can still participate in the content itself. Everything's built very deliberately to be local first. So you present a presentation at a local event. You can also bubble that up to a global network, and you can also cross promote that through multiple global networks as well. So that's kind of how we think about the content sharing aspect of that. Presentations are there to create a portfolio. So if I give multiple presentations, I'm creating a portfolio for myself. I've given this talk at 10 different conferences or whatever it is. Something else we want to layer on top of that is, I mentioned at the very beginning, that Guild source of sponsorship on behalf of communities. We actually pay out communities from that sponsorship. Something we'll be adding hopefully next year is paying out speakers as well for their content. So a big thing I'm hugely passionate about, and I think has been historically very difficult, is paying speakers. That's something that we just want to solve as a platform, in that, hey, if you give a talk, you give a presentation, you have obviously your profile attached to that, you're entitled to a cut of the revenue as well. So that's something I want to do very badly next year. I can't promise any timeline, sadly, but that's something that I very badly want to do, and we have the capacity of doing.
So just to close the loop on that, like what is the level at which a group goes from simply existing for free to receiving money from you?
We're still figuring that out, to be honest with you. We just started paying out groups, I think January this year. So we're still we're still figuring it all out. The way I look at it is just like a YouTube model. Where YouTubers, they don't get paid for like a little while. I think it's like 3 months, 3, 4 months, whatever it is. YouTube gets
Yeah.
enough data on them, and then they reach a threshold where suddenly they're monetizable.
Yeah,
I
I think they
don't
have subscribers and watch time, I think, is the thing that YouTube watches out before you become a monetizable asset or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so whatever that equivalent is for us, we'll be discovering that as we go on. Right now, we're still quite early. Right now, we're just paying out everyone. So we don't know if in the future it'll be a threshold. We don't know where that threshold will be. We don't know what the qualifiers are for that threshold, but there likely will be one in the future, of course. But right now, yeah, we're just simply paying out everyone.
So because the future of getting together, even in highly technical or technological fields, some guilds or events are going to be largely social based instead of content generation based. Is the quote unquote value or payment going to be different based on the tag of the type of event? Because it seems like that would be very difficult to police for you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one of those things we have to figure out as we go on. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Like, I think that we as a people and as an industry are still trying to figure out what needs to exist, or what replaces the thing that has started to broke, or is the rough equivalent of an old car that's broken down on the side of the road, and whether or not we're fixing the thing that's there, or you're getting a tow truck and finding a new vehicle to move forward. I think we as an
Yeah.
industry are still figuring that out.
Yeah.
So I would say, so the other thing that I just am trying to understand is, so the small group of people, small to medium-sized people who meet, usually geographically based, is hurting. But the thing that's also hurting is the independent technical conference right above that, because somewhat unsurprisingly, those individual gatherings often fed to and informed people about regional tech conferences that were occurring, and were often the places that speakers were sourced from. Um, where does Guild maybe fit in with helping the existence of non, I don't want to just throw out Microsoft Build, but any company sponsored conference instead of an independent, community based, value based, discussion based conference instead?
Yeah, great question. So fundamentally, because we take sponsorship as a first-class citizen as well, because we solve for sponsors. A lot of the time, finding and sourcing those sponsors is really the make it or break it for those types of conferences. And what I found speaking to those conference organizers and speaking to sponsors is they have a lot of difficulty finding each other. They have a lot of difficulty quantifying value to each other. They have difficulty transacting with each other. They have difficulty like measuring the return with each other. That's just more work, and it's frankly just a distraction for both of them. So we solve that as a platform. Basically, we onboard sponsors onto Guild. We make those conferences available via Guild. Sponsors can sponsor them, and they can see all the metrics and et cetera, within a real-time dashboard back to sponsors. So sponsors are very happy to actually transact with Guild, and we found that makes it much easier to actually host those conferences. So that's kind of one side of it. The other side of it is, yeah, as you said, sourcing speakers. We have presentations on Guild. We have speaker portfolios on Guild. We want to build CFP into Guild as well, so that you can just submit a presentation directly to a conference or essentially or any community directly on Guild, thus make content aggregation easier for conferences. We have venues on Guild right now, so we're currently collecting information on obviously the addresses and obviously what's there, but we're also collecting information on accessibility, like is the whole venue wheelchair accessible? Are the bathrooms wheelchair accessible, et cetera, et cetera? And we hope to make that venue information available essentially essentially as a wiki for any of the community organizers on the platform to use. So we want to just build all the tools to make it as easy as possible to host conferences. Right now, we're actually hosting a conference on Guild already. So we're hosting React Native London Conf, and that's actually created from the React Native London community, which is also on Guild. And so
Awesome.
for them, it happened very organically. They said, hey, Taz, we already have our whole community on Guild. We want to just host our conference there too. Can you guys just build what we need? And I said, sure. So they're actually hosting it on there. So that's actually in just under 3 weeks' time. Yeah. And so I'm super excited for that one.
So I mean that does get to one thing that I hadn't talked about. So people that were hosting a meetup 5 years ago are 5 years older. Life situation might be different. They might have gotten a few hobbies since the last time they put one together. And the people that were providing buildings, maybe free or inexpensively, maybe those people don't have the same jobs anymore, or their department got disbanded, or the company isn't really the same company that it was 5 years ago. And so finding inexpensive / free space to meet has definitely been one of the things that's been difficult for anyone who wants to start things again. Is there a process that anyone has defined of basically passing on the torch? The way for a meetup to continue to existing, if it had been continuing to meet over the last 5 years, is to find the people most passionate and slowly bring them along and make, potentially giving them small amounts of responsibility through the process, and then kind of maybe indicating, hey, next year I'd like to hand over the torch, and having that be a much more gradual process. That process is not a thing that can happen anymore, because they're just, people haven't been meeting. Is there a mechanism that the old heads, or whatever you want to call it, some of the people with meetup or organizing experience have to pass on the contact information for facilities, best practices for keeping people in line, best ways to communicate? Is there a process for passing on that torch? Because I don't know if it exists right now.
In terms of Guild itself, I don't think we have a mechanism for passing on kind of those more fine-grained details in terms of like how to run a community itself. I know for Toronto.js, everything is just on GitHub. So we have a Toronto.js/org mode repository, and everything is just documented in there for everyone. So like essentially that's been great for us. In terms of the more kind of organizational things, such as obviously sponsors, venues, speakers, et cetera, we want to just provide that through the platform itself. So we want to just make that part easy. In terms of like, we also in the future want to host things like code of conduct directly. So when you join a guild, you accept code of conduct immediately. Things like that we want to build in. So that we want to take care of as a platform. But in terms of like the like for example with Toronto JS, there's something about like just the blurb that you say at the beginning of every event. Like what are the things you want to cover? That's all in the org mode GitHub repo right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that seems to make sense. So like I don't want to keep you forever, so I just wanted to ask maybe one question at the end. Like what does the future of Guild look like for you? Where do you want it to be? Where do you think it's going to be? There's a certain amount of future prognosticating that requires. I just wanted to know what you think the future looks like.
Yeah, well, for me on an incredibly personal level, and something that you said at the beginning, community's done so much for me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for community. And so just being able to host communities, give back to communities, have a platform to enable communities, that for me is what I want to do for my future personally. I'm quite fortunate in that I'm a very very highly sought after tech consultant, founder, executive, whatever the heck you want to call it. People would happily throw lots of money at me, and they have in the past. But frankly, for me, money doesn't motivate me in the same way. Impact motivates me much better. And for me, I'm from Toronto, Canada. I now live in London, UK. I've done a lot of work globally in Asia, in Europe, of course, in North America, and so on and so forth. And I've seen essentially how I've seen different cultures, and I've seen the state of humanity around the world. And for me, starting local first, getting people to know each other, getting people to realize, hey, there's more in common with us than there are different, you know what I mean? Getting that kind of local vibe where you kind of know people, you respect people, you can have great conversations with people. That is, I think, the glue that we need, and the glue that's been missing a lot of times, especially from online global discourse. And as I said, for me, community's done so much. I'd love to give back and do more for a community. So for me, it's very much of a long-term type of goal with Guild. And I said, if not now, then I probably won't be doing another startup. So this is my kind of last hurrah, and I plan for it to be going for essentially for a very long time. So that's me personally. From a platform perspective, I mean, we're still very young. We're currently raising around a capital. We want to hit into high gear. There's a gajillion things I know I want to do with the platform, but I simply just need more, like more hands to do it. Our growth has been incredible. So thanks to everyone all around the world for using us and telling their friends about us, and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, we're very much just getting started. So things like paying speakers, for example, as I said, CFP, as I mentioned, a venue wiki, discussions as a platform, all those things we want to add, hopefully over the next year. But again, sadly can't promise any timelines right now, but hopefully we can get to things like that.
So like I guess one thing to end up is, so I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about Guild until very recently. And so I might not be the only one. If anybody sees this and wants to do something, what's the call to action you would want to provide? That if what you're talking about sounds good, what's the next step?
Yeah, so I mean, feel free to email us, hi@guild.host. We're always around, always happy to reach out. Admittedly, our website is very light right now, and it's like that on purpose. We aren't yet at a stage where we can just onboard thousands and thousands of communities globally. We want to grow at a steady rate. However, if you like what we're doing, if you want to sign up, go ahead. Just create a new account, create a new guild, et cetera, et cetera. If you want anything, yeah, feel free to email us, hi@guild.host, or tweet at us at guild__host. We'll always be around. We'll always get back to you.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate your time. Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to verify or to state out loud, I am not being compensated by you. I just think that what you're doing is cool. So I just wanted to say that out loud as well. But yeah, thanks again. I very much appreciate the time and your expertise in talking today.
I guess I do have one question for you. So you mentioned you found out about us through a tweet.
Yeah.
Which tweet and from who? And
so
tell me more about which community you run. Yeah.
So I mean, the one I've run a couple different communities over the last years. One of them I've run was kind of if you've heard of Hack Night, it was basically a city version of Hack Night, which is basically take any side project and work on it together next to people. And I've, and because that name wasn't great, I actually ended up changing the name to Side Project Work Night. And I've run that over a couple different things. I'm also on the board of something called Forward Festival, which is a yearly tech and entrepreneurship conference in, it's festival in Madison. There's usually, I think last year there was about 75 events. It's kind of the rough conflagration of people who are vaguely tech or entrepreneurship focused. I was a former Linux user group president, and I just wanted to talk to people about Linux, to anybody who would show up. And the guild that I created is actually called That Guild. And the reason that I found Guild was Clark Sell, the organizer of that conference, saw what you were doing and retweeted it. And since I'm following him, I immediately went to that, because the previous event that I had been doing, which was kind of that community meetup, I had run on Eventbrite because I didn't want to spend $50 to try to get people to just come to an event. And because I wanted to do maybe 3 or 4 events, in the next year, I wanted to find some place to communicate outside of a very corporate focused Eventbrite or a very, costly to me meetup.com, and guild.host was 100% the place in the middle that met my need of just wanting a thing to exist and needing a way to communicate it. So that's kind of where I came from, and how I found, Guild to be the thing that fit my needs in trying to make a community exist, or kind of rebuild it, hopefully better and stronger.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I've never actually met Clark myself, but I'll have to thank him whenever I do.
No,
Because
yes,
I think it's
he's
fantastic.
definitely a great guy to talk to. Feel free to reach out. He is open and honest for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to thank him, like essentially whenever I meet him.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks so much, Ross.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
So, are meetups dead? Are guilds the future? Long live guilds? Is that the answer to our problems? Or are we just gonna find a way to magically have people meet together and kind of learn to be human again? Who knows? If I had a crystal ball, maybe. But what we need to do is to figure out ways to make it not as hard as it is right now. And at least there's some people that are working at trying to make that happen. Hopefully I can be a part of the solution and not the problem, and hopefully you can too. Thanks for taking the time. Later.